Hey everybody, Darby here with Gen AI University in today's part three of our Gamma Mastery series, where we're going to be going into a case study on using the Gamma API to automate presentations and content at scale, how you can leverage the Gamma API inside of Zapier specifically in this example, and how you can get started using the Gamma API today to automate your marketing, sales, and operational content to turn those ideas and those documents into beautiful presentations, infographics, and more. Basically, the building blocks that we're going to walk through today for those that are just tuning in right now are going to build on top of part one and part two of that mastery series, which is really designed to lay a foundation of what you need in Gamma to be able to generate any sort of branded presentation or document or social in a certain style guide. And that's what we're going to be using the Gamma API to actually tap into today. The idea behind this specific segment of the Mastery series is to show and highlight what's possible to leverage the Gamma API. Came out with their Gamma 3.0 release, where you can now use the Gamma API to generate content through Gamma using automations. And there are a lot of different use cases that I hope that you can see a direction that you can take this for your own specific business. But ultimately, I'm going to show you what the end result is right now and contextually how I'm going to be building on this and applying it for those that are coming through our community. So this is just a Google Drive folder where I have a few pieces of our knowledge base that I used for the automation, and then a Google form and a Google Sheet that is managing the intake of data and then the processing of it, which Zapier is monitoring to create these outputs. And so what we see here inside of our Gamma dashboard, we have our folders on the side where we have different projects, pointing your focus towards the API generated tab on this left side. If you click on it and you see nothing, it's because you haven't generated anything with the API. But once you start generating with the API, those outputs will appear here. And you can see I have a lot of presentations that I was using with this testing. This is the one that I shared inside of the community for what ultimately took about 3 minutes from the time of an intake form triggering the process to this generation being completed without me actually touching anything. And so I look at this as being a first draft of an output that is going to align with the frameworks and the direction that I told that I had the automation create, where I would come in, analyze the results, modify the presentation anywhere that I saw fit, and then pass it along to the community member or the client that would be the receiver of this information at the end of it. So this document right here is 15 pages total. It starts with being a roadmap basically for an analysis based on what you do as a business owner and what are your three challenges that you're facing right now, and helping identify specific areas that you can focus on and creating a custom roadmap for implementation. So I'm just going to go through some of the different slides. Slide 2 is an understanding of your business. So it reiterates what was given on the intake side, reiterates the challenges that the person submitted on the intake form. On this slide, gives a high-level snapshot of your ideal target audience, and then going deeper into finding a single leverage point. And again, all of this contextually, if you are like a fitness coach that runs a certain type of like program or diet, nutrition plan, or anything, just as a totally different example than like something AI related, this could be trained to be outputted based on like your specific types of frameworks that you help people with implementing. So if you're creating a custom nutrition plan or something like that, could be a different use case. In this case, I designed this one to come up with 3 quick wins that you can use AI for in your specific use case, and then mapping out a 7-day starter plan based on that information. So it's all kind of building on top of each other, to then a 30-day roadmap for transformation, and then recommendations of some other AI workflows that could be implemented to support what you're looking to accomplish. A priority pyramid of what, based on what we've already generated so far, what are some of the top priorities in order that you might want to start focusing on first, identifying some things that maybe you don't want to be doing or stop doing right now until you get some of these other things in place. And then just a general analysis. This is where you're at now. This is where you want to go. Identify some risks and hidden opportunities. And then this slide and these last 2 slides are just kind of like a wrapping up. Here's how we can support you with the stuff that we have inside of our community as resources, and then like an immediate action plan. This idea was initially seeded from a problem that a lot of people, including ourselves with our community, is how to personalize somebody's experience and onboarding into your own community or client onboarding process or anything that you are doing as a coach or a consultant to help people get a result and get something that they can start to use right away to go ahead, implement, and actually take action on. So that is one use case for how this could be used for someone that's, say, a community leader that wants to onboard people that are joining their coaching program or a consulting program of some sort. But all of this information was seeded from the trigger point, which was Google form. And so some of you in the community right now on this call got a few questions that I was asking out some people to hear what are some challenges that we're facing in the community right now. And so I was using these as just a starting point for myself to understand what are some ways that we can take a really simple series of inputs. What is your role? What do you do? What are the top three challenges that you're facing right now in any context, like a website or anything that we could use to analyze and go deeper on? Once this information is submitted, I had it send all that information directly to I pinged the Gamma team today because I was running into issues, which is why I don't know I'm not going to be able to show a live version of this right now with it connecting with Zapier. I think they're doing some updates on their end, so it's not going to be a permanent issue. But the inputs for my example that I just shared, I cloned a copy of it. So you can see my name. I gave it a description for the other business I run called SideHustle Games, where it does like live events, comedy show experiences. And then the top three challenges I gave it were getting sponsor partners, building the audience through YouTube and social, and helping more people play the game more often. And so this information right here was exactly what we ran through the Zapier and AI automations to then lead into what you see here in this Gamma report. And so the bridge, once somebody fills out the Google form and then it sends that to the Google Sheet, the bridge is this sheet being a trigger for new information coming in to then start the automation. So what happens next is and you can use, if you're more technical and understand and like working with make.com or N8N, you can use that too. I chose to go with Zapier because I just find their agents interface really easy to navigate and connecting a lot of these tools together. If you're in Zapier now, so we're switching over to the glue that's tying all of this stuff together to get the information in and then transfer it back to Gamma is in Zapier. And so this decision intelligence insight generator was the first agent that I built in Zapier. See, I'm having like an issue with the Copilot thing. So what this is and how we got here was I used Claude a little bit to help with coming up with what does this workflow look like to work with Zapier to go through start to finish what I need to accomplish here. And so you can see the instructions to follow based on the trigger. Once a new row gets triggered in this spreadsheet, it will begin following these instructions. And so it receives the member intake information with their name, role, top challenges, and website. And then it begins to analyze their business data. And so providing a website here helps a lot with what I can go and find and learn about your business. And it starts going through these different layers of the instruction. So like categorizing the primary challenges areas, applying the MarketSauce 9000 method, and then generating a comprehensive decision intelligence profile. And this is the really key part here because you may have a 5-part framework that you run with new clients to help them with like getting on the same page with a direction they're trying to go. That may look totally different from what you're looking to build, but you can see how this outline is right here directly aligned with what you saw in the Gamma sheet. After this section of the instructions, it moves on to populating what we'll walk into is the generate the Gamma. And once it goes to this generate a Gamma, it'll trigger with the Gamma API, the actual API that you're using with Gamma, which a quick tab back to the Gamma document. Actually, I'm just going to go. When you're in Gamma, how you get to your API, and I think you need to be on the pro plan for it to be able to use that. If you go to settings and members on the left side, and then you go to API keys, obviously you can't see the full key right here. You would just click create an API key, give it a name, and then this is what you're going to give Zapier so that it works directly with your Gamma account. It's actually very easy to get set up, and you just insert the Gamma API key. Let me refresh this. whenever it populates in Zapier. But if that's not working right now, then we'll just have to work around it. All you do is connect your account and then it opens up a new tab. This is where you would paste that API key. Once that's added in, you're using your credits in Gamma. And so just be aware of how often you're using this because it will use credits every single time you do it. And so it's going to go and generate the Gamma, and then it's going to save this generation, this step 7 right here. It's going to save that generation ID, which is a really important part that I want to highlight, is that ID, I have it updating the spreadsheet right here, the same spreadsheet that I added the intake form onto, so that I can have another Zapier that's set on a delay, and I'll explain why that's important here as well, to then grab the actual Gamma deck and complete the analysis for me to know it's fully complete. I did have it set up to send me an actual email with a breakdown of everything right away. And this is just a templated, like a HTML email that like sends me the basic outputs and it finishes up the automation from there. So before I start diving into how we set up the Gamma, the important part that I'm gonna pull that email up so you can see, because there's a lot of ways that you can customize where you want this information to go to after you set the Gamma up and you get the actual presentation ID. But the problem that I ran into when I was doing this initially that kind of had me stuck for a little bit was Gamma takes time to generate these presentations. And even if the presentation is like only 90 seconds or 30 seconds or 60 seconds to generate, there wasn't a way for me inside of this Zapier agent to set a time delay to find that. And so I had to set up a second Zapier workflow to automate and actually get the fully complete generation done. But this was the first like email that it would have it send me based on what I inputted. It would just send me this email that mapped out the basically what this is going to be the context that was fed into Gamma that created this presentation. And so this was kind of like a step 3, like a step before I actually got the fully built out generation. I just had it send me an email, had the generation ID, and then I had it just tell me you're going to receive a follow-up email in a few minutes from me there. This is a separate Zapier setup that I had to set up, and I talked to the Gamma team about it, and this was one of the options they suggested because I wanted to be able to open up the spreadsheet and then have the link to the direct Gamma link here, because otherwise, if I was running, like a ton of different Gamma generations, it would get really messy to try and figure out if I had like 10 going at once, which one is associated to who. I just wanted to know exactly where that generation was. So this Zapier was set up to monitor a new spreadsheet row that was being updated. And so the entire purpose of this Zapier workflow is to just strictly monitor this column, this column right here. And then once a new generation ID was created, this Zapier would wait. I set it to wait for 3 minutes, and then it would go and search my Gamma account with that generation ID and find the actual link to the complete Gamma. And all of these Gamma presentations that I was generating took about 90 seconds to generate, maybe less. And so it wasn't a lot of time, but there was a delay that I needed to set this workflow up for a trigger. Once it found that generation, it would go and find the Gamma URL, which you can see the Gamma deck URL right here. It would just update this sheet. And then I could use this sheet and I would send it to a Slack message notifying me that the Gamma is ready for this person. And also sending me an email, which you can see in Zapier. These last 2 steps are just like send me an email with this and then send me a Slack message with this so that I had all of that context just ready to go. So I could wake up and I could have 10 of these if I had ran 10 at once to just, okay, cool. Here's all of the links. They're all organized in this row. So I can come back and modify and edit them and then just open up the direct link to what I showed you at the beginning, which was the decision intelligence layer roadmap for the SideHustle games. So that is pretty much start to finish how all of those pieces would tie in. But the important part when it comes to the actual generation of this Gamma spreadsheet starts with making sure that it was aligned with the template that I wanted to be using again and again. And so I'd created my own market sauce version that's using Gen AI University colors to generate these. And when you give your Zapier agent a tool like this, you have the ability to give it the tool Gamma, so generate Gamma. This is where I can see it. Oh my gosh, why is this not pulling up? This is so annoying. Trying to think of how I can show this because it is hard to describe without actually being able to the different pieces.
This is what you'll see whenever you get Gamma added into Zapier. So you'll have your Gamma account that you link it up with, and then you'll have a number of fields to set up. So you have your things like your input text, your text modes, your formatting, your generation. And so now there's even this nice drop down where you can select all of your themes and places to put things like the custom instructions, your text tone, and image style. And something that I like that Gamma added in with their Zapier integration is you can see the image models, the amount of credits they were using. So for this example, you can see Imagen 3 Fast is only 2 credits. The model I was using for my initial testing, which explains why I was burning through credits so fast, was I was using Ideogram 3, which is 20 credits per image, so 10 times as many credits as Imagen. Go through here, select accordingly. You can select card dimensions and even what folders inside of your Gamma account you want to place things, plus the workspace edit access for internal and external. And that is what you do to set up the Gamma creation section. And with that in mind, I ran another generation of this with George's example from the spreadsheet to test it out. So you can see the agent just ran, it finished running the entire output following our framework, formatted it for Gamma, had an issue with putting it into the folder. And so we made that adjustment accordingly. And it went through the entire process. As you can see, scrolling through here on the right side, outputted it, sent me an HTML email, and sent that off to me. And so what that looks like when we're over here inside of our email, this is what the email I would get to review and send off to George. And then more importantly than just this email, we can go back here to our API generations and you can see the new decision intelligence roadmap for George. And taking note of the quality and the style of the images, I can see immediately a distinct difference. You can see the style for the stick figure art is a little bit different than the one that was far more credits. We can see through here the full breakdown of the roadmap, which I will go ahead and send out to George so he can check it out himself. And yep, that is how you would get the Gamma generation set up, which as you can see, once we're inside of the presentation, if we go to the upper right and then select the view source prompt, this is all of the information from the additional instructions to the tone to the theme, image style, and everything is already set up here inside of my prompt editor.
This is where everything is set. You're giving it your content. You're giving it all the instructions about text, generating, condensing, preserving. Who do you want to write it for? What's the tone that you want to write it in? What language do you want to output in? And really important is the theme. Is I have my own custom theme here that I generated, and this theme's name is GenAIU Market Sauce Evolved. You can use a ton of standard ones inside of Gamma, and we covered how to set up your own custom versions of these in the first part of this series. So once you have a theme locked in and you have your tone, who you want to write for, and all of this extra context, all of that can be fed into this Gamma Generate API. It just looks a little bit different. You can identify how you want the format to be presented, whether you want presentation, a web page, document, or social, and instruct it for how you want it to look. This custom style prompt is something that I also added in to the Gamma generation. So I used this prompt, professional yet cool, fun, innovative, modern doodle art with black stick figures and yada, yada, yada. And so that is what influenced this art style that was being produced in the presentation. You can also opt out of using any sort of images if you want to. You could just like toggle it to say use no images, or you could use different AI image models. And so for the example I was using, I selected the Ideogram 3.0 model, but you have the option to use a number of different models that Gamma provides, and then you need to provide that information into the Zapier workflow so that it knows how to set this whole generation up. So we have the tone, who you're writing it for. If you leave some of this stuff blank, the AI will come up with it for you based on context. And so that's an area that I would encourage you to experiment with and how like accurate and on point coming up with a who do you want to write it for. If you give it an exact who I want to write it for, you can give it for entrepreneurs and founders living in Austin, Texas. And then that could be your input. I think this one, it just automatically generated the who do you want to write it for. And then I found that the additional instructions on the right-hand side was really helpful for keeping it on track as it was going through the outputs and had to name each one of the generations so that like it named them all in a consistent way. And so that is where I used the custom instructions. I think I was limited to like 2,000 characters here. You can play around with how much of additional instruction you want to give it. And then another thing that you can select when you're inside of the Gamma generation is what kind of content do you want it to be creating? Do you want it to be going super minimal, not very many words, all the way to concise, detailed to super extensive, which the one I generated, I selected the extensive one. And so it generated more content. And then lastly here, calling back to the generate, condense, or preserve. So all of this information right here was generated based on my Zapier going through all of this information, paired with an important thing to note is that when you're setting up a Zapier agent, you can actually give it a knowledge source. And so for anyone that understands how AI and large language models work, if you don't give it context about your business, then it's not going to know about your business or what sort of framework you use or specific information that you want it to point back to and refer. And so what I did was I synced up the knowledge source for this particular workflow with tabbing over to my Google Drive that I was showing at the beginning to this document, which was a lot of information about our community, where to start, where to go through stuff inside of the community, and kind of like a working knowledge base for what I wanted the Gamma API to use as a way to influence how this content was being outputted and produced. So, with all of these pieces set up in place, every time that somebody like me, for example, or if anyone else submits one of these to be ran for themselves, this intake form is going to trigger another row with that person's specific information. And then once that information is submitted here, this agent will initiate these instructions to follow. Once it begins generating the Gamma, it'll start the generation based on this ID. And then that Zapier workflow I shared will then trigger once the ID is populated on the sheet, and it'll set a 3-minute delay and then just go and grab this Gamma share link, which if you click share at the top right of your nav bar, it'll grab this link and then add it to this deck right here, and then send me a Slack notification and an email. So stringing together a handful of tools here to make this process work, but the end result is a 3-minute generated draft of this 15-page presentation that was created based on like these being all of the instructions that I gave for inside of the Zapier agent to trigger the automated generation of this presentation using this content, using the generate extensive context. If I wanted to just simply preserve this exactly the way it was, all I would do is toggle this to preserve and it would keep it exactly the same way. And so if you're feeding it an automation where it's going to be the exact same outputs that you want to feed it, say you have a 10-page SOP, but you have 50 of them and you want to keep the exact content in place, but you want to follow and create automated presentations in your brand theme, you would go the route of preserving the content so that AI didn't like generate and go too far off the tracks. And I know we're covering a lot right here, but I wanted to walk you through an actual like start to finish example that I figured out last week with the Gamma contest, and open the floor to some questions here, as well as we can go back into anything if we need to. Checking Latasha's question, can you do the same function with Microsoft Excel and Zapier versus Google Forms? I think, let me see. So I haven't done it with Microsoft Excel, but if I were to, instead of a Google Sheet, use something else, in Zapier tools this agent can use, what I would do is click add tool, and then I would type in Microsoft. And so you see this Microsoft Excel example right here. If I select that Excel sheet, I would use that as the trigger, and then I would update the Google Sheet here and the trigger as well with that Zapier intake workflow. If I needed to walk through that, Natasha, let me know. Or if that was what you were asking, then that's cool.
Nope, that was what I was asking. And then just like they have the Google Forms, how Microsoft has forms, I could have it do that process as well. So like the person could fill out a form and then that form gives you an Excel spreadsheet. And so you can do the same kind of function.
Yeah, so I would just search through here what that is. And you could do the same thing for anyone watching this that uses Typeform, for example. You could have it trigger with Typeform as being the thing that intakes this, or a number of other form generators. Because Zapier connects to like almost any app, there's a lot of ways that you could have that initiate the initial start from a form. But yeah, it would just need to have a Zapier would just need to have access to that tool.
And then I do have one other question. So I could almost use the same process too, then to have a responsive dashboard if I wanted to by utilizing like some inputs, or I'll play around with it because I might not be asking something for what we're talking about
Are
using
you,
today.
can you clarify when you're talking about like the output type of, yeah.
So like a one page, I'm thinking like if Gamma can create a one page, I guess you would then just say like a slide, right? That values would change
Hmm.
when people put information into a form by utilizing some type of a flow similar to what you showed here. But that's something new to me. So I'm going to play around with that so that they
Yeah.
can use tools they already have instead of using some new tools like a whole nother system.
Yeah, so you can customize how many pages you want like the gamma to present in. So you could say every if you're giving here's these five new numbers that someone had, generate a one page gamma that outputs in this sort of style. And then you could have that push to just generating like one page presentations, or I guess they could be called dashboards too, because you can embed stuff into those pages and customize it from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Any other questions? So, Saucin.
Hi,
Hey,
good to see you again, Darby.
likewise.
I noticed that you mentioned you started before I came in later and just got active again. So where do I start? You said you mentioned another lesson you did, or
Yeah, so today is part three in the
right.
three-part series that we were running for the month of November. Once we're doing these workshop series inside the community, you'll tab to the classroom. For this series in particular, the mastery workshop is going to be where these videos are. And so you can see part one, which is where I would recommend starting, because
Mhm.
that talks about how to set up your theme in your own brand and style guide. And then last week we did part two, which covered more about like taking that branded style guide and then taking like an existing standard operating procedure or other
Mhm.
forms of content and creating marketing collateral and other assets from it. And then that theme again ties back into this conversation with the API, because once you have a
Mhm.
branded theme that you're going to keep consistent across all of your presentations, you can use that same theme with the API so that whether you're doing social media posts or documents or presentations, it'll all be in the same color, style, font, theme. And then you can get really specific with the type of imagery that you want it to generate and how it actually follows those outputs each time.
Yeah, I've been using Gamma for a while, but not to this extent. Yeah, I am learning a lot right now. My usage is basic, just generate and put the text, and but I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't know that they have an API, so I just created mine and Gamma. Thank you for showing us how to.
Totally. Yeah, it's that's a relatively new thing that Gamma introduced with their launch of their 3.0. And so it's still something that we're figuring out. We're all learning in a process. And Gamma ran a contest this past week for finding some creative uses for the tool. And so this was an example of the one that I went through with a lot of the community's feedback on what might be some good examples of it. I think one of my biggest takeaways from going through this process last week and learning how to connect all these things together was on you could use anything for the intake side of the process, but getting a Zapier agent to be able to like use that context along with your own company's knowledge. I know that there's going to be more advanced and more complex systems that can come out of it, but just being able to produce that first draft that you can go in and then modify and work with Gamma even if it's 5 or 10 minutes of your time per generation, will add up significantly if you're doing this at any level of scale. And one of the things that someone mentioned inside of the community was like, this is a really solid, like, first draft, step one for this process. There's still a place for the human in the loop in this type of thing. And it's whether you like having understanding that, hey, AI generated this, cool, based on what your input, and then a framework that you're outputting the contents in. But as the human in the loop and the operator here, if I'm going to walk somebody through this process and maybe include this as part of a white glove onboarding into a 30-day, let's go ahead and make some serious progress over the next 30 days, having a step-by-step focus on what to do now and what to start to implement can be really helpful for people that are going to be actually like doing the thing that you're helping them do, but it might not always be perfect right out the gate. And so just having this generated first and foremost is not only a time saver, but then it gives me the ability to come through and then just using Gamma, you can edit contents, you can use their agent, which we had an agent section at the last Scale with AI Summit video we did with the Gamma team. We went into using the agent so you can conversationally edit slides as well and modify stuff, have it make updates for you using the Gamma agent. But I like having this as a starting point and then reviewing it and saying, okay, this stuff makes sense, that stuff makes sense. Let's lock in if this is like the true right path forward for where it's me in this example that I'm giving this direction. But knowing that this is analyzing my other business and seeing the outputs consistently like focus on the same thing gave me clarity in terms of some of the key levers that I need to focus on and what are some of the things that maybe I've been doing but aren't necessarily getting me to the result that I'm looking for in the straightest line possible. And so even just looking through this, reading it, and then as someone that can provide maybe additional directions or point people in a direction of, hey, this would actually be a really good use case to use a Claude project to set a Claude project up that can do this type of stuff for you. Or maybe Gemini is a good example here, like providing some more nuanced recommendations and using like an AI version of that, but also tying it back to if you are like a fitness coach or you're a health coach or you're creating customized nutritional diet plans. Let's just take a off the wall example of like you're providing like ketogenic diet like plans for somebody. You probably already have a process and a system and like recommendations that you may recommend to everybody, but aren't always applicable based on if somebody brand new or have they been doing the keto diet for 6 months already, right? And so based on those intake responses, we'll personalize what an output looks like. And again, giving it to somebody is a way that they can go and take action on this right away. And I'm looking forward to testing this out with other use cases, with other people that run communities that work with coaching clients to streamline this process because we know Gamma can do it. You can go through this entire process once completely manually, and that's fine too. But after you do this process a number of times, you'll identify ways that you could use the automation, the API, to save you time in getting to that end result and maintaining the quality that you want to keep in your standards.
I noticed you said you like Zapier. I don't know, how do you feel about Make instead of Zapier? It's easier than N8N, but why did you go with Zapier?
For this, I went with Zapier because I like the interface of how to work with the agents and being able to prompt it and give it instructions and conversationally build and modify the workflow in a way. For me personally, it's easier for me to work inside of this type of interface. As with Zapier, you can chat with their Copilot right here, and this will actually help set up, make edits to it. Like, hey, I need to add in a Google Sheet integration here. Can you help me do that? And then it'll go through and it'll modify and help with getting all of the instructions set up and troubleshooting it. And the same thing goes with the other Zapier interface here. I gave it the instructions of what I needed. It actually set up the majority of all of this, and then it just asked me to fill in a few of my own key accounts to do it. And I do use Make for some other automations that we run. I just personally find that Zapier, the interface for me getting this stuff going, especially as a version one, it's easier for me to get it off the ground. At scale, I know Zapier can be more expensive than some of the other options out there. And so if this thing starts to scale and is costing more than I would like it to per how much we're generating it. And it's because the Zapier tokens are eating up a bunch of the cost. Maybe we would rebuild the same workflow once we know it works inside of a make or inside of an N8N to get the cost down a little bit. But at least for me, that's just a personal preference in using the tool and getting it set up where, okay, these are my instructions. This is everything. Yeah.
The reason I asked, I want the easiest, and it seems to be super user friendly. I might use it.
Yeah.
I'll
And for
try.
those, yeah, I mean, for those that are looking to just explore with this, you can get most of this stuff done just, I think I built most of this with a free plan, but I did upgrade to be able to get this workflow working the way that I needed to. But if you were, and this is a more advanced Zapier type of tutorial, which I am curious if anyone is interested in the community and going a little bit more advanced on Zapier workflows. Let me know in the comments if you guys want to see more stuff specifically related to Zapier. But you can create what Zapier calls pods, where I didn't add anything to this pod, but I think it's kind of like you can have these agents talk and coordinate with each other. So have like multiple agents doing different things inside of a pod. But if you're just going to go create one agent for something, and let's say I wanted to create an agent, they have a lot of templates here, but let's say like I want to create an agent that monitors a spreadsheet workflow and then uses Gamma API to create a custom presentation for me based on the inputs in that workflow, and then send me an email with a summary of what you created. So you can give it a prompt like that, and then it will start to build the structure and infrastructure around what does this agentic workflow look like that can help automate or transfer the data or monitor things related to that. And it's asking stuff based on what it knows about my account. What should I start with this workflow? So the more of a complete idea of what you have start to finish of what you need coming into this will help this whole process go much faster. And so when I was initially building out the workflow I was sharing with you, I'd spent a good bit of time, let's say like a few hours, working back and forth with Claude. And then I gave it a super long prompt that had a ton of instructions for everything. And then it used that to refine the instructions for what was like actually necessary to relay to the AI to get the job done. And then it went and executed that. And if you're like, oh, create like another workflow that we've built in Zapier was like, hey, monitor my Google Calendar every day at 7 a.m., scan it for an executive summary of all the sales calls that I have coming up or calls that I have coming up, and then do an analysis of the company and then send me a breakdown of that. And so I had a workshop with Gamma last month and I had that workflow trigger. And in the morning, I have a Slack notification that says, hey, today you have, and I had 8 calls because we were doing our Scale with AI Summit. I had a high level overview of every one of the speakers. What does their company do? What are they going to be talking about? And it was like, oh, Gamma just announced their Series B, raising a unicorn valuation, doing all of this stuff. And I was like, I knew that already, but if I didn't, I was like, oh, that's a good thing to know that this just happened with somebody. And I mean, that workflow took just a few minutes to get set up. And I think we posted that on our YouTube channel as well. But again, something you could build inside of Make as well. But yeah, I think Zapier is just a easier, faster way to get started for me, at least. Thanks y'all for tuning in. Stay tuned inside the community for the stuff we've got going on. Stay in touch. Subscribe to us on YouTube at JennyIU, and we'll see you guys in the
See
next
you.
workshop.